The question of whether Annie Potts' Meemaw will ever return to Georgie and Mandy's first marriage is one that keeps coming up among fans, and honestly, it makes perfect sense. Meemaw wasn't just a supporting character in the young Sheldon universe. She was the soul of it. Her absence is still felt, even as Georgie and Mandy's first marriage continues to grow into its own identity. So the real issue isn't just will she come back, but whether the show needs her to, and under what circumstances a return would actually make sense. Right now, there's been no official confirmation that Annie Potts will reprise Meemaw in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. That alone tells us a lot. If the plan were to bring her back regularly, or even for a major arc, it likely would have been teased already. Instead, the show has taken a very deliberate approach. It acknowledges Meemaw's importance without leaning on her presence as a crutch. That suggests the creative team is trying to let the series stand on its own rather than living in the shadow of young Sheldon. That said, the door is absolutely not closed. In fact, it's very intentionally left ajar. Meemaw is still alive in the timeline, still very much part of Georgie's life, and still influential even when she's off-screen. The show references her sparingly, but meaningfully, which keeps her existence active without overusing nostalgia. That's usually a sign that writers want to preserve the option of a return for the right moment rather than rushing one for ratings. Annie Potts herself is another big part of the equation. She has spoken warmly about Meemaw and her time on young Sheldon, but she's also been clear about appreciating a natural ending to that chapter. Actors don't always want to immediately jump back into the same role, especially one that ran for years and carried so much emotional weight. A guest appearance down the line is far more realistic than a recurring role, and that actually works better for the story. If Meemaw does come back, it almost certainly wouldn't be just for laughs. The writers know how beloved the character is, and bringing her back casually would risk diminishing her impact. A return would need to matter. That means a major life moment for Georgie, a business crisis, a marriage crossroads, or a family reckoning that requires the one person who can cut through his bravado and tell him the truth without hesitation. That's what made Meemaw so powerful in the first place. She wasn't there to coddle Georgie. She saw him clearly, especially when he was lying to himself. In Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, Georgie is constantly walking that line between confidence and self-destruction, between ambition and overreach. If the show ever decides he needs a reality check that no one else can deliver, Meemaw is the nuclear option. But here's the thing, the show has quietly been proving that it doesn't need Meemaw to function. Characters like Ruben's abuela have stepped into that wise elder role in a way that feels organic rather than forced. She doesn't replace Meemaw, but she fulfills a similar narrative purpose, grounding the story, challenging egos, and providing perspective rooted in lived experience. That tells us the writers are aware of the gap Meemaw left and have chosen evolution over imitation. That evolution matters because Georgie and Mandy's first marriage isn't trying to be young Sheldon 2.0. It's about adulthood, responsibility, marriage, and the slow realization that being grown up doesn't mean being prepared. Meemaw thrived in a story about childhood and family foundations. Her presence in a show about adult consequences has to be carefully measured, or it risks turning into fan service instead of storytelling. A one-episode appearance, however, could be incredibly effective. Imagine Meemaw showing up during a moment when Georgie thinks he has everything under control, only to dismantle that illusion in minutes. Or arriving when Georgie and Mandy are at odds, offering advice that doesn't take sides, but exposes uncomfortable truths. Those are the kinds of moments that would justify her return and make it unforgettable rather than overused. There's also the emotional reality to consider. Meemaw represents continuity across the entire franchise. Bringing her back would instantly reconnect Georgie and Mandy's first marriage to its roots in a powerful way. But that power works best when it's rare. Too much exposure would soften her edge. Part of what makes fans miss Meemaw is the space she now occupies, the sense that something meaningful is absent. So will Annie Potts' Meemaw ever come back? The most honest answer is, possibly, but only if the story truly earns it. All signs point to a future guest appearance being more likely than a full return, and that's probably the smartest choice. The show is building its own emotional language, its own supporting pillars, and its own sense of identity. Meemaw doesn't need to be there every week for her influence to be felt. In many ways, her absence is part of the story. Georgie is navigating adulthood without the safety net he once relied on, and that's the point. When Meemaw was around, she caught him when he fell. Now, he has to decide whether he can catch himself. If and when she does return, it should mark a moment where that journey reaches a turning point. Until then, Meemaw lives on in the DNA of the show, in the blunt honesty, the refusal to romanticize struggle, and the quiet understanding that love doesn't always sound gentle. Whether Annie Potts ever steps back into the role or not, Meemaw's shadow is still very much part of Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. And honestly, that might be exactly how it's supposed to be.